Aloha, welcome to the Mr.G podcast. Today is Wednesday, January 7th, 2024. I'm coming to you from Honolulu, Hawaii, on outskirts of Chinatown, where it's a warm 78 degrees here in mid-January. I welcome all of you all here, the Mr. G podcast. There's a few Mr. G podcasts. So if you want to find me, Mr. G Hawaii podcast or Gregory Brandt podcast, the video edition of the Mr. G podcast is uploaded in their entirety at youtube.com/Gregory Brandt and twitter.com/Gregory Brandt. I've been so busy today, I didn't prepare a lecture. So what we're going to do, my quote this year is don't complain, don't explain. So I'm not going to complain, I'm not going to explain, but I will tell you today we're going to have a 20-minute podcast, 10 minutes of talking about NBA basketball and 10 minutes from reading from my book. I'm really happy to come to you in 4K with a professional microphone, a professional lighting, and I'm really happy to read from you my first book, read to you from my first book, Gonzo Education, which is available on Amazon and at Barnes and Nobles. All right, so let's get to it. Today, we're almost at the midpoint of the NBA season. Now, who are the top teams in the NBA? Well, according to ESPN.com, we know the Celtics usually are always the top team. They're ranked as the number one team by ESPN.com. The Celtics have 3 All-Stars this year. They have Jaylen Brown, Kristaps Porzingis, and I got a little bit distraction. I got a little bit distraction. I got a little bit upset because this is actually the second roll through of the podcast. When I initially started it, one of my neighbors here called on the phone. It's not even, no, don't complain, don't explain. I'm just going to do it. All right. Don't even need to give them the time. Right. So here we go again. All right. There we go. So Boston, number 1. All right. Number 2, we got the Minnesota Timberwolves. Great home team. They have a great defense. Rudy Gobert and Cat Anthony Towns, 2 7-footers on a defense. And Ant is Cat. Ant is one of their best players. I always forget his name. Anthony, I guess is his last name. He's one of the best players in the league, and he has like that Michael Jordan-esque to him. All right, number 3, we have Denver Nuggets. They're once again one of the best home teams in the league. They're 28-14, ranked number 3 on ESPN Power Rankings. Denver is always a great home team, just like Utah is always a good home team. One reason is that they play at high elevation. A lot of people recently have sent me DMs asking for sport picks, for betting picks. And I do give picks sometimes on this podcast, but what I can tell you is betting on Denver to cover the spread when they're playing a team on the second game of a back-to-back has a 750% winning percentage over the last 20 years. So you have a 75% chance of winning that bet. That's a change that they're going to make to the NBA schedule next season. I believe Commissioner Penis Head is eliminating back-to-backs, and he says, oh, it's to rest the players. But it's also because people have been making so much money betting against the team that's playing in a back-to-back. The same thing happened the other night. Oklahoma City, they played the second game of a back-to-back against the Lakers, and the Lakers etched out a win. And then the next game, Oklahoma City, or the Lakers, then the next game, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma City played the Lakers, and then the very next night they play the Clippers. I don't know. I know the spread was Clippers by 5.5, but that was a bet that I would take Clippers because you always want to bet against the team playing on the second game of a back-to-back. Speaking of Oklahoma City, we haven't seen them on ESPN Power Rankings. I put they're definitely in the top 5. They're here at 4. So ahead of Oklahoma City, we have Denver at 3, Minnesota at 2, and Boston is the number 1 ranked team. Number 5, we have Milwaukee Bucks. They have 2 All-Stars, Giannis and Damian Lillard. Number 6, we have the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic is playing awesome. Kyrie Irving has been injured all year. So many people talk smack about Luka Doncic. I saw on the Gilbert Arenas podcast where Gilbert Arenas and Rasheed Wallace was saying that Luka Doncic isn't even the best player on his own team. Are you seriously? Kyrie Irving's the most overrated player in the NBA. He hasn't played more than 50 games in the last 8 seasons. Luka Doncic is probably the most talented player in the NBA. Luka Doncic and Jokic are the top two players in the NBA, I would say. Number 7 on ESPN Power Rankings, the Clippers. They were previously ranked number 6. The Clippers have Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, James Harden, and Russell Westbrook coming off the bench. If they can stay healthy, they got Zubats at the center. They got that man, Terrence Mann, who's a great wing 3-and-D guy. If the Clippers can stay healthy, I can see the Clippers making Western Conference Finals, making NBA Finals. The thing is about the NBA, it is fun and upsets do happen. Miami made it all the way to the NBA Finals last year. But when you look at the Final Four for this year or every year, you can basically predict it before the season's even halfway up. In the Western Conference, you have Denver will be in the Western Conference Finals against probably the Clippers. Um, those are the two best teams. Younger teams like Minnesota and Oklahoma City, they tend to get upset in the playoffs. And then next in the Eastern Conference, that's even easier. There's 3 great teams. There's Milwaukee, Boston, and Philadelphia, and that's it. One of those 3 teams are going to be the NBA Finals. So, that does take a lot of fun out of it, whereas like the NCAA tournament, you have a lot more upsets. So number 8, we have Philadelphia. Number 9, we have Miami. Number 10, we have Cleveland. They're such a sleeper team, but they're in the middle of the pack. Number 11, New Orleans. And that's where I'm going to stop because New Orleans had a junk team. They got embarrassed in Las Vegas at the first ever NBA Cup. And you could tell by their body language. They got embarrassed against the Lakers. And that game was incredible to watch because you saw LeBron James, 39 years old, schooling Zion Williamson, who's like 23, 24 years old, but Zion's all like overweight and like they're giving him the open shot and he's not taking it. And the New Orleans Pelicans were all timid. They lost all respect for me in that game. I've never seen a basketball game like that before. And the Lakers, it's not like they were a great team, but they acted like they were a great team. That goes to show fake it till you make it. LeBron James, AD, and Austin Rivers, they were all just so cocky in that game. They wouldn't have even gotten to that point without Austin Rivers, by the way. But they were so cocky before the game. They were like clapping, dancing before the tip-off even started. And that's, like I said, fake it till you make it. They faked it and acted like they were a good team. All right. So those are the top teams. Let's talk about the top players briefly. All right. So I said Luka Doncic and I didn't mention Joel Embiid and Luka Doncic, Joel Embiid, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. Kevin Durant is 5th in scoring quietly this year. Rebounds per game, Sabonis of the Kings is number 1. Rudy Gobert of the Wolves, number 2. Antonio Davis is number 3. Nikola Jokic is number 4. Assist per game. Nikola Jokic is also 4th in assists with 9.1. Luka Doncic, 9.1. So you really got to look at scoring and assists. Luka Doncic is number 2 in scoring and number 3 in assists. That's as good as you can get, basically. Then you have Trae Young and Tyrese Halliburton at 12.5. Fred VanVleet, one of the only undrafted successful NBA players, is 5th in the NBA with 8.5 at the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets and the Orlando Magic, 2 very similar, 2 of the youngest teams in the league. I've seen this happen before. I've been watching NBA basketball for 30 plus years. You have 2 good teams with some, up and coming all-stars. With Orlando, you have Banchero, and then with Houston, you have their centers, Seguin and Green, and they have some good players there. But towards this part of the season, they start to slow down a little bit. And these are the teams that, like, maybe if they make the play-in, they'll do well. But I don't see really much coming from them. The young teams usually always get upset early in the playoffs, and it's sad. It's sad, those young teams. It's sad. I don't even know where I was going with that. So Jay Poleltel is leading the NBA in field goal percentage. Shout out to Jay Politi, who I don't even know who it is. Leading the field goal percentage. Zubats of the Clippers is number 5. But blocks per game, Victor Wembanyama, number 1 at 3.2, ahead of Brook Lopez. All right, Victor Wembanyama. He'll be one of the first rookies to get to win the blocks title, to get the most blocks per year. Shout out to San Antonio Spurs and Victor Wembanyama. All right, now with that being said, We're going to read a little bit from my book. Started at about a little bit of 12:05. So we had 10 minutes of basketball. All right, this is my book, Gonzo Education. It's available on Amazon and in Barnes Nobles. And I'm just going to read, I'll pick a chapter to read from. This chapter, chapter 8, Free Pizza. It's always raining during funerals on TV, and it was no different for mom's service. I wasn't in the mood for sunshine, anyways. I got through it high on painkillers, sobbing like a little girl. I was fine on the drive there to Kerrville, but I totally lost it when I saw the casket and realized mom was inside. I'll never get over what happened the last year of her life. I wish I could have saved her. I was surprised to see our father there. The look on his face made me sick to my stomach. It was the closest thing he'd ever come to smiling. He was gloating like he'd won something. Apparently, by his disturbing reaction, she must have taken some of his secrets to the grave. He hadn't spoken to her in more than 20 years, and he never once had a nice word to say about her. Even when she lived down the street, he used to drive by and say something nasty in front of his kids. He walked up to both Michael and me, shook our hands, and said he was proud of us. If I could do it again, I would not have shaken his hand. I would have punched him in the stomach. The narcissistic sociopath thought we actually cared whether or not he was proud of us. After the funeral, Benny helped Michael and I clean out our storage unit and move stuff to Austin. Benny talked about how much he liked our mom and how she was always nice to him. It was the last time I ever went to San Antonio and the second to last time I ever saw Benny. I didn't take any time off from school after she died. It wasn't an option. I forced myself to walk around and go about my routine. She wasn't dead, she was on vacation. Despite my denial, the world felt different, and in the back of my mind, I knew she was gone. Continuing with college is how I coped. I'd pretend she'd get a copy of my grades every semester. Better make her proud, I'd say to myself. Michael moved in after she died, and it was good being around someone who knew what we'd gone through the last year of her life. My first year at ACC was the hardest to get through. Despite having somewhere to live, neither of us had a car and we had to walk or take the bus everywhere. Taking the bus wasn't so bad, but a month after we moved in, our fridge broke and we hardly had any food. Toward the end of the semester, when my financial aid check ran out, sometimes I'd go through a full day of classes on an empty stomach. In between classes, I'd head a few blocks east and get in line for the Salvation Army's lunch. In minutes, I went from sitting in a classroom with kids dressed in fashionable clothes to standing in line at a soup kitchen with old bums and rags who smell like sweat and booze. One day I saw someone from my developmental math course in line at one of the downtown feedings. I'm pretty sure he saw me too, but that's not an occasion where you yell out, "Hey, how about that algebra?" When I didn't feel like the bread line, I'd scour the college bulletin board for any groups, meetings, or events that advertised free food. Every Friday, I'd find something to go to that said free pizza. That's how I discovered that ACC had a student newspaper and was looking for an assistant editor. I knew working as an editor for the college newspaper would look great on my transfer application to the University of Texas School of Journalism. So I put on my best clothes, walked right in, looked everyone in the eye, and asked for the job. I had plenty of experience with newspapers, a perfect GPA, and a warm smile, so the all-female staff hired me on the spot. The ACC newspaper is where I brought my writing up to a college level with help from my coworkers. I'd previously always called myself a writer, but a vivid storyteller would have been more accurate. I had a patient editor who helped me improve my writing. She had more writing experience than I did. She'd been published and she knew how to put together a student newspaper. By the end of my first semester, she had taught me more about writing than any teacher. I worked for the paper a few hours every day, writing stories, suggesting ideas, and commenting on others' work. The editor did most of the proofreading, page layout, and everything else that goes into making a quality paper. I helped where I could, like by increasing circulation by spending a few hours a week handing out copies of the latest edition to every pretty girl I saw on campus. I wrote the editorial on page 8, I'd say. I worked for their paper for a couple of semesters, but my heart wasn't in it, and I hate being cramped in an office. So I did everything I could to get fired. I had a guilty conscience getting paid for doing such little work, so I made our lack of things to do more obvious by going for coffee and coming back 3 hours later with cold cappuccinos or a story about a Jamaican witch doctor I met on the drag. Sometimes I'd call in sick with an absurd excuse like, I accidentally handcuffed myself to the bed. Other days I wouldn't show up at all. Finally, after a couple months of insubordination, I got my termination. Soon after that, I got another job working as a telemarketer for the Austin American Statesman. It was at their main headquarters right off Congress Avenue overlooking Town Lake. I worked in the circulation department handling the new and current subscribers. I was working 40 hours a week and going to school full time. For the first time in years, things seemed to be going well. I had decent clothes. Michael and I each had running vehicles. I had a few friends, and I even had a little money in my pocket. Other than the first month, I woke up in a bed the whole time I was enrolled at ACC. I never dreamed I'd enjoy it so much. I loved learning new things and spending hours in the library studying while intermittently looking out a window. I'm sentimental, so one reason why I enjoyed ACC's Rio Grande campus so much is because it was Austin's first high school, erected 100 years earlier. There were signs from the past like blue and red vintage lockers lining the hallways, antiquated out-of-date maps, and old school periodic tables that stood proudly in the back of rooms. My favorite part of the school was the old 1950s graffiti left by my rebellious predecessors. One of my favorite things to do was go through that day's obituary page in the cafeteria. I'd find all the lifelong Austin residents who'd recently passed on and also went to high school in the same building that I was going to college in. They ate lunch in the cafeteria I was reading about their deaths in. I imagine a lot had changed since back then, but I don't think the walls, stairwells, and lockers noticed a difference. I read about how these people died 50 years after they sat where I was sitting. 99% of everyone is forgotten about 20 years after they die. Celebrities are remembered a couple decades longer. I found their simply spent lives fascinating. Most went to the other side of the world to fight in terrible wars during their youth. When the fighting ended, they came back to Texas, got married, and had children. They worked around Austin and they started businesses. I'd put myself in a deep meditative state and watch them carousing the hallways like it was 1955. Streamers and posters lined the walls for that weekend's sock hop. I'd be using the restroom, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see a 1950s greaser in a leather jacket sneaking in a Lucky Strike cigarette before the first morning bell. I savored my time in the back classrooms, gazing out of windows while the teacher lectured, knowing that the exact same window had had previous decades of daydreamers doing the exact same thing. That's from my book, Gonzo Education, one of the best American memoirs ever written. It starts when I drop out of high school and ends when I graduate from the University of Texas School of Journalism. Hook 'em horns. That right there should tell you how good it is. I don't need to explain. It's a great book. Google it, check out the reviews yourself. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, the Mr. G Hawaii podcast. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify podcasts, Apple podcasts. And if you want to watch the Mr. G podcast episodes in their entirety, twitter.com/Gregory Brandt and youtube.com/Gregory Brandt. Thank you guys for listening. Everybody have a wonderful day. And from me and my street kitties, we bid you aloha.